Our gospel talks about hearing the voice of Jesus, who is that good shepherd. And earlier this week, maybe all of us were kind of waiting for another voice to say something very specific in Latin, habemus papam. And that happened on Thursday afternoon, and I got to tell you, it was one of the biggest bombshells of my life because I didn't expect an American to be elected Pope. And I guess it was good that I was by myself because my reaction was kind of like one of stunned. Well, I was stunned. I mean, I was watching the feed on EWTN on my computer, and when I heard the name Cardinal Prevost, I'm like, no way. Because I'm like, there's no way. Like, they've told us for all my life that there'd never be an American named Pope because America's too big. And so I was incredulous. I didn't even catch his name because I just couldn't believe it. But it was great joy, though. It was joyous. And so today we have great reason to celebrate on this Good Shepherd Sunday that we also celebrate that we have a new universal shepherd for the church, Leo XIV. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about who Leo XIV is, what he's saying, because he's already said a few things. He's already said quite a bit in these 3 days that he's been Pope. And also, too, what it means for us, because what he's saying to the cardinals actually has implications for us. So who is Leo XIV? Well, his baptismal name was Robert Francis Prevost, and he is from our shores. He's from the south side of Chicago. And there was a little bit of controversy because about which team he had allegiance to. Wikipedia said that it was Chicago Cubs, but his brother said, no, he's never been a Cubs fan. He's always been a White Sox fan. And I don't think it matters. I think it's good either way, because whether he roots for the White Sox or the Cubs, he's a pope that knows what it's like to suffer. They've had to endure a lot these 100 and so years. So from Chicago, he went to an Augustinian college called Villanova. And then there he entered into the Augustinian order of priests and became a missionary. And missionary is very important. That kind of is, at essence, who Leo XIV is, or Cardinal Prevost. And so as a missionary, that led him to Peru. He was dispatched to Peru. And he became a bishop at one point, the Bishop of Chiclayo in that little country of Peru. Now, in 2022, Pope Francis appointed him the head of the dicastery for bishops in the Vatican. And at that point, that's a very prominent role. And that contributes a little bit to why he may have gotten elected. In that role, he got to know a lot of the bishops of the world, even the cardinals. And they got to know him by many, many qualities. One, a very kind man. But in addition to that, too, he was very, very proficient in what he did. He was very, very intelligent and really was a great administrator, knew how to run a meeting, knew how to do the work that he was set out to do. So all those things kind of coming together in the conclave, they looked at Cardinal Prevost and said, this man is an incredible man, and he's such a humble man and a kind man. Let's see if the Holy Spirit's moving us to elect him. And so Cardinal Prevost was elected Leo XIV. There's a couple other things about his background. He has a doctorate and a licentiate in canon law. And he's also a mathematician. And you may have noticed, if you watched him the last 3 days, he's been reading his homilies and his addresses, because he has a need to be very precise about his language. If you know a lawyer or a canon lawyer, they're very, very precise in what they say. So that's just his nature. So we're going to see a lot of precision in what the church teaches. So we have that to look forward to. So that's Cardinal Prevost or Leo XIV up to this point. So what is he saying? Because he said some stuff already, which is kind of, I've enjoyed almost everything he said. And he says a lot just by the name he chose, Leo. It actually harkens back to 2 other popes that were named Leo. The first is Pope Leo I, who's also known as Saint Leo the Great, who is actually the patron of our little church down in Tully. Saint Leo the Great, Pope Leo I, was pope from 440 to 461, and he was known for being a very, very good theologian. We still benefit from a lot of his writings in the church today. But also, probably the thing he's known most for is that he fended off Attila the Hun from invading Rome. He was a warrior. I mean, he was a warrior pope. Maybe not out there with a sword, but he was a very formidable man. The name Leo means lion, so we can think about Saint Leo as the lion. But the other Leo was the actual last Leo to take the name of Leo as Pope, Pope Leo XIII. And that's the one who Leo XIV owes the most inspiration for taking his name. Now, Leo XIII, he was Pope in 1878 to 1903, and he presided over a very tumultuous time, actually maybe a very fast time in the world, because technology was taking off. It was a great time of change in the world. The Industrial Revolution was happening at that point. So in 1891, Pope Leo XIII issued this encyclical called Rerum Novarum, and it's really called the Magna Carta of Catholic social teaching. This is probably the most famous, the most prominent encyclical of probably the last 200, 300 years. And in it, Pope Leo XIII outlines the Catholic message in that time. Because at that time, during the Industrial Revolution, although technology was advancing, workers were being exploited. We probably read this in our social studies class. There were factory owners that employed people to work maybe 16, 18-hour days, sometimes with no day off, at very little pay, in awful working conditions. So Rerum Novarum was the church's message to say, no, workers have rights and dignity because they are made in the image of God. And so it was a treatise that is really spanned the test of time. It really has echoing effects throughout all of history. And it was the church really that stands up and says, no, there's an injustice here, and our message needs to go out. So it really tells us the power of the church's message in all time. And Leo XIV said, at that time, back when Leo XIII was Pope, the church needed to push that message out at that time. But now I see as Pope that the church has a lot to offer in this day and age, because the church now offers her treasure of social teaching, Catholic teaching, in the midst of a new revolution, a new industrial revolution, specifically artificial intelligence. And he said that yesterday. He said that in his address yesterday. So it's so prophetic, because really artificial intelligence, we're just on the cusp of what it can do. And we know, just like other things can be exploited, that artificial intelligence, there's a chance that also can be exploited. So Leo XIV, I'm kind of already seeing this man as a visionary. He seems like he is seeing what's going out there, and he wants to take what he said, that treasure of Catholic teaching, and put it out into the world. And that I can see is the essence of him being a missionary. Really, that is him talking to a missionary. And the thing about Leo XIV is that he is in continuity with his predecessors, going back to Francis, going back to Benedict, going back to John Paul II, and especially going back to Leo XIII. He is continuing that message of going out as a mission of the church and going out into the world. But he does it in a little bit different way. Not all popes are the same. And Leo XIV is very unique, I think, in a few ways. Going back to Pope Francis, he talked about mission, but he talked about it in a different way. This phrase has been associated with Pope Francis, going out to the peripheries, going out to the peripheries and making the gospel message known out there. That's important. But Leo XIV, I think, is focusing on more kind of the domestic preaching of the gospel, not just essentially going out to the furthest reaches, but there's a necessity for us to preach the gospel to ourselves, to reattach ourselves to that gospel message, because it can get lost. And he notices in this day and age that the church really needs to put its message out into the public forum a little bit stronger. He said this in his homily in the Sistine Chapel on Friday. He says that the Christian message faces a lot of kind of obstacles. One is that the Christian message in a lot of places in the world is seen as either weak or unintelligent. That's not true, but he says but it's not true that it's weak or intelligent, but it's seen as that. And he says that there's other securities that people seek other than the Christian faith, whether it be money, fame, pleasure, comfort, that people are comfortable going to that rather than seeking out the Christian message. And so Pope Leo XIV said that for that reason, it's necessary that we go out and preach that mission, that mission message out to the world, especially in the public forums where it already is being preached, because we need to really learn better what the gospel says and what Jesus says. So really there's that charge of being a missionary in the world where we are right now, not just going out to the furthest reaches, but we need to really reattach ourselves and rediscover the joy of the gospel. So that's what Leo is saying. That's what he's saying. He's preaching this mission message. So what does that mean for us? Because it really means something for us too, because as Vatican II really outlined very well, that we're all called to be missionaries. We're all called to go out and preach the gospel. How do we do that? Well, we don't go out the door day one. We don't act first. It's necessary for us to, as we hear in the gospel, hear the voice of the shepherd, hear the voice of Jesus. And so it's necessary, before we do any missionary work, to pray and to listen to the voice of Jesus. Do you know who the patron saint of missionaries is? Saint Therese of Lisieux. Now, that may be profound to you, because Saint Therese of Lisieux lived to the age of 24, and she was a Carmelite nun in a monastery in France. Never left the Carmel, never left the convent. Yet she's considered the missionary They're the patron saint of missionaries, because really mission work starts with a deep prayer life. She was known as being so spiritual. So that really tells us something about our missionary spirit, that we can't just go out. We need to listen to the voice of the Lord. Now, leading up to the conclave, I read another book by a cardinal, just in case he got elected, just to give me a little bit of help for Sunday. He didn't. And his name is Cardinal Robert Sarah. And he wrote this book called The Power of Silence Against the Dictatorship of Noise. And it's really great. I've been enjoying it so much. And he talks about this because he says that silence is necessary for us to hear the voice of God. And I love the phrase that he subtitled the book with, against the dictatorship of noise. Because there's so much noise around us, not just audible noise, but distractions. And those distractions necessarily take us away from God. So Cardinal Sarah says that it's necessary for us to seek out the silence, because that's really the only true place that we're going to hear the voice of God. Hearing it in the silence. That's where we can meditate upon the Scriptures and actually hear God speaking to us, not in an audible voice, but hearing Him speak to us in the silence of our hearts. And that's really difficult for a lot of us, because our world is surrounded in noise. Silence is uncomfortable. But Cardinal Sarah said this about silence. He really defined it really great. Silence, he says, is not absence, but silence is the manifestation of the most intense presence. Silence is the manifestation of the most intense presence. Because when we give ourselves over to silence, when we make that time to be silent with the Lord, we are, in fact, offering ourselves over to God, who is the most intense presence. So today we celebrate because we have a new universal shepherd who is calling the church to a new missionary spirit. But we know before we can be missionaries, before we can do that work just in our little corner of the world, just in a little corner of our community, we need to make room so that we can hear the voice of the shepherd. That voice of Jesus who speaks to us in the silence of our hearts and who does give us a calling. A calling first to know that we are loved by Him, but also then to preach that love out into the world.